welcome everyone to this evening's MoCo Underground reading program. My name is Laura Sanchez, and I am the museum manager at the Sandy Spring Museum. I'm going to read a short statement from the museum and then introduce Julia, and we'll be maybe off to the races. During these very difficult times that we have experienced as individuals and as a country, Sandy Spring Museum too has experienced challenges grappling with the role we play in a system that benefits some at the expense of others. Sandy Spring Museum stands firmly with those fighting against the racism, structural disadvantages, and systemic injustices that have oppressed Black people in the United States for hundreds of years. The United States was built on discriminatory practices that were codified in our legal system, beginning with the dehumanization of Native people, followed by enslaving Black people in bondage as property for the financial benefit of those of white European ancestry. Sandy Spring Museum stands on land that was once a plantation where Black people were enslaved. We recognize that the museum is the beneficiary of a historically unjust system. We are committed to working toward dismantling systems that perpetuate racism and discrimination in order to build a just, equal society. Tonight's program is one of many programs we will be hosting that challenges the dominant narrative. So to increase the accessibility to all of our programs, our virtual programs, including tonight's, have closed captioning. If you would prefer not to see the closed captioning, please hit the More button on the bottom of your screen and click on Hide Subtitles. Also, if everyone could please mute their audio when they're not speaking, it will provide for better listening for all of our attendees. So now I'm going to introduce our hostess. Julia Taglieri's work has appeared in The Writer, Potomac Review, Gargoyle Magazine, Washington Independent Review of Books, and numerous anthologies. Winner of the 2015 William Faulkner Literary Competition for Best Short Story and the 2017 Writers Center Undiscovered Voices Fellowship, Julia completed her master's in writing at Johns Hopkins University. She serves as an editor with the Baltimore Review and recently founded the Montgomery County Underground Community Reading Series, which showcases the work of DMV area writers at quarterly public readings. Follow her at julia@justscribbling.com. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was lovely. And for anybody that isn't sure where the mute button is on your screen, if you look at the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a mute, and you can just click on that, and that'll mute you. So welcome, everybody. I am so excited for tonight's reading. We have a special group of readers with us tonight. They are joining us all as having been featured in the recent anthology, This Is What America Looks Like. If you have not gotten your copy of it yet, I highly recommend that you do so. For tonight's program, I have two special guest editors who put this beautiful collection together and are going to be hosting tonight so that you don't have to listen to me blather on. At the end of the program, I will have some announcements for you about next year's plans for the MoCo Underground reading series, as well as for our final reading of 2021, so that you can start your plans for that event as well. So with that, I will turn it over to our guest hosts this evening, Jona Colson and Caroline Bock.
Thank you, Julia. Well, first of all, thank you to the Sandy Spring Museum. It is a special place. I can't wait to be back in the museum sometime this year or next year. And thank you, Julia, for just being a terrific literary citizen and forming MoCo Underground, and for all the other projects I know you do. And I'm thrilled to be here with this wonderful group of writers, many who live in Montgomery County, but all of which are from DC, Maryland, or Virginia, because that's the goal of our small press, the Washington Writers Publishing House, which is to showcase and celebrate the work of DMV writers. And we did it this year with our anthology, This Is What America Looks Like, poetry and fiction from DC, Maryland, and Virginia, which features 100 writers and 111 works. And it really covers everything that the museum seems to really want to stand for. Black Lives Matter, social reckoning, our racial divides, as well as their stories of hope and family that speak to, America today and yesterday. So you'll get a flavor of all of that tonight with my co-host, the fabulous poet, Jona Colson.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Caroline. As always, I agree with everything Caroline says. And I do, actually. And I thank you all, the poets and the fiction writers, for celebrating this anthology and for the wonderful introduction. And to be in this room, in this space, is really a privilege. So thank you all very much. And I look forward to our readers this evening.
Now it's back to me no, Jona, you have our first reader. We're going to do poet fiction writers. That work for everybody?
Got it. Okay, so we'll get right into it. Our first reader this evening is Washington Writer Publishing House's own Robert Herschbach. Hi, Robert.
Hi,
So, Robert is the author of a chapbook, A Lost Empire, and a full-length book of poetry, Loose Weather, which was published by the Washington Writers Publishing House. He lives in Laurel, Maryland with his wife, 2 children, and 2 cats. So thank you for being here, Robert.
Thank you, Jona. Thank you also, Carolyn, and thank you, Julia, and the museum for hosting this wonderful event. I'm very honored to be here. I do live in Laurel, which actually is in 3 different counties. There's a Montgomery County part of Laurel, which is about a mile from me. There's a Howard County part and a Prince George's County. So I think Laurel is about the size of New York City. It's just a really weird kind of place. But anyway, here I am. I'm going to start by reading the poem that appeared in This Is What America Looks Like. And it's called Emergency Vehicles Coming Through. Can you hear me? Is my audio okay? Am I audible?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, all right. Emergency vehicles coming through. Our roads are sized for catastrophe. The cul-de-sacs like asphalt skating rinks built for fire trucks to turn in. The layout in general, a banner campaign with a message for us all. Look, look, someday you too. I remember how a softball slipped into a curbside drain when my son was 3. He hit it into the street with his toy bat, and the slope was such that it rolled automatically into the dark slot. He couldn't believe it was irretrievable, that there wasn't some way to track a ball to the Chesapeake, have it fished out, that it wouldn't come bouncing up from somewhere on our next trip to the beach. I couldn't explain why lost becomes part of the name we have for some things, and why the county wouldn't send a crew to dig up the street for an $8.99 ball, special as it was with its fuzz and its cheery orange color. How this was just the beginning. Some kinds of trouble can't be fixed, not even by superheroes flying to the scene on gleaming red trucks. And in time, we're all on close terms with such trouble. Okay. This poem is called Umbrella. I thought it would be a little bit appropriate to this time of the year. We're getting a lot of rain. Okay, Umbrella. Released from its function, it has become a radio antenna or a party favor, a noisemaker aimed at the rain. And as I grip the curved handle, fighting to put things back into shape above my head, it might look as though I'm scrubbing the air back and forth with an inky cloth. You can't blame an umbrella for taking its chance at flight, like a cat slipping out a door, blown open. No catastrophe here. No overturned car or stoppage of the heart. Nothing to alter or end our lives. Still, inside any of us is a 2-year-old who sat in a puddle, who lost a piece of candy, whose balloon was kidnapped by the sky. frames bent or snapped, fabric off the ribs. You see them everywhere on gusty days like this, contraptions that failed, use become refuse, thrust into garbage cans, left on bus benches, handed to the woods, a profusion of memorials, omens or flags. The city has turned to a church in the medieval style, complete with laughing gargoyle, and the child continues to whine. And I think I'll do one more. This came out recently in Apple Valley Review, and it's based on a New Yorker cover. So I saw this cover many years ago in November 2004, to be exact. And I remember at the time wanting to write a poem about it. And over the years, I eventually did. I mean, I guess it went through a number of iterations before it finally became the poem that appeared just this last couple weeks in Apple Valley Review. It's called Keatsian Theme. And the cover that it refers to appeared on November 8th, 2004. Two trains stopped at a station, two readers glancing up from the same well-reviewed novel. He, ruffled hair, sagacious look. She, eyebrows lifted in surprise. Each taking in the sweet fact of a like soul's existence, and at the same time registering the catch. They're on opposite tracks, about to be sped away to unshared lives. New passengers crowd aboard. The doors prepare to close. The city is many cities, each large enough to get lost in. Quick, storyteller. Invent a chain of happy accidents. Bring them both to the novelist's book signing, or seat them in the same trending restaurant. In fiction, as sometimes in life, anything's possible. Or let them be free of future mortgages and discontents, ignorant forever of the other's troublesome quirks. Marry them for a moment, their gazes aligned as though feeding each other from the text in their hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. So I think I'm able to ask a quick follow-up for every reader. So Robert, what was that last poem called? I apologize, I missed the title.
It's Keatsian Themes. It's a allusion to Ode on a Grecian Urn.
Because I just frantically Googled the cover for that New Yorker, and I would encourage all of you to do that. And so maybe my question, just a follow-up question, and again, thank you for contributing to This Is What America Looks Like and the poem Emergency Vehicles Coming Through. But maybe I could ask, how, because this is something when I got my MFA with the amazing Myra Sklarew, who's here this evening, we very often responded to paintings or visual art, or I remember one time we actually went to a sculpture class or a drawing class. So what are the ways in which you feel like other visual mediums have influenced your process or your poetry?
Well, visual art in particular has a special importance to me. First of all, because there are a lot of visual artists in my family. My grandfather was a painter. My dad has taken up painting later in life, and has become very involved in it. So I've been around visual art a great deal, but I am not a visual artist myself. It's never been my thing. But I enjoy, one of the great things about poetry, especially, one of the things you can do with poetry is experience another art form through the medium of poetry. So I feel it's a way of engaging visual artworks, but in a different way. I did take an art class many years ago, and it was fun. It was rewarding, but I realized fairly early on that it was not going to be my vocation. So I think there is a certain pleasure in being able to do that, and not just with visual art, but with any other art form as well. Music, for example, also a recurrent source of inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And I think we put the link in the chat. So you can take a look at that cover. It's a great cover. And I can actually sort of hear the musicality in that poem as well. So it's wonderful how they all kind of influence each other. Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll throw it back to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Robert and all the readers and all the writers and people who are in Zoom with us, take a look at the chat. We're having a wonderful conversation as we listen closely to the poems and to the fiction. I'm sure will be the same way. So make sure you take a look at chat, which means you just click on the chat icon and you'll see a whole conversation going about this wonderful reading. So I now have the wonderful honor of introducing Eva K Sullivan, whose short story I think people will really like. I think they'll like all our short stories, but this is The Rowing Coach. Eva K Sullivan is a teacher at Richard Montgomery High School in Rockville, Maryland. She has been rowing and coaching in the DC area for more than 20 years. She hosts a writers group with the Writers Center of Bethesda and is a member of the Maryland Writers Association. So I cannot wait to hear The Rowing Coach. So Eva, take it away.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful welcome. I would love to say I didn't spend 15 months on Zoom, but I did. Now I'm back teaching in person. So this feels kind of like the old way of doing things, but it's different because it's this reading. So my piece is a little bit long and I kind of apologize. I'm going to try to read the whole thing. When I found out about this writing contest, This Is What America Looks Like, I took the prompt literally and decided to write about a river that used to be clogged and dirty and polluted and is now a welcoming river for water sports and boating. So that prompted me literally to take this theme and write about what I know. This is called The Rowing Coach. It was 3 days before the first high school rowing regatta of the season, and March hadn't quite transitioned from lion to lamb. Coach Lori was using every extra minute of daylight savings time to work the varsity rowers hard. They had just completed a 4-minute power piece up the Anacostia River, past Benning Road Bridge, and they were hunched over, breathing hard, and waiting for her to catch up in the motorboat. Budding beech trees, vines, and march grasses lined the riverbank. One would never guess that this lush greenway was in the heart of Washington, D.C. "Good job," Lori shouted through the megaphone. "Catch your breath and get some water. We're doing another piece." The inflatable life jacket didn't provide any warmth against the rushing wind as she drove. She always told the kids to dress warmly because it felt 10 degrees cooler on the water. She wished she had followed that advice. Even with 2 layers under her windbreaker, she was chilled. In contrast, the kids were stripping down to their performance tees. What had started as a beautiful, bright afternoon was quickly turning into a blustery evening. The winds cooled the air as the sun grew lower in the sky. If they were going to get back on the docks before dark, they'd have to row full pressure straight upstream. They could not be late for the bus again, or the parents would be all over her. "Sarah, what was your stroke rating?" The coxswain moved her microphone away from her mouth so that she could shout back to the coach without deafening the girls in the boat, who had speakers under their seats. "We got up to 33 strokes a minute," she said. Sarah was the most experienced coxswain on the team, and yet she had gotten into the boat wearing shorts. She must have known her legs would soon be covered with a colorful array of discarded jackets from the overheated rowers. "It looked like you were all together at the catch," said Lori. "Make sure you square your oars early on the next piece." The boys' varsity coach had not shown up for practice that day, which was unlike him. So Coach Lori was alone on DC's Forgotten River with both squads, 2 8-person rowing shells, each guided by a coxswain barely old enough to drive a car. 18 teenagers in total. Why had she agreed to this? She knew she could count on Sarah and the girls to steer straight and avoid collisions. However, she was not as familiar with the boys' crew. She just wanted to get through practice without any disasters. Always a possibility with young people whose frontal lobes were not fully developed. She checked the lineup list on her clipboard, then picked up her megaphone. Jason, I want you to give the girls a 2-boat length head start, okay? Jason gave her a thumbs up signal. There was way too much chatter in the boys' boat, but she ignored it. The tides and the rains had left the water high and flat, near perfect rowing conditions. Lori would have loved these conditions when she rowed in college. She had spent so many early mornings pulling an oar through the waters of DC's larger, more turbulent waterway, the Potomac, that rivers were an inseparable part of her psyche. The Anacostia was once considered a polluted, sick, urban dump, but now it was home to turtles, beavers, and bald eagles. These kids did not know how lucky they were. As the racing shells moved upstream, Lori dropped back so that she could follow directly behind the girls and see all 8 blades feathering, and catching in sync. The boys had passed them, turned at the bend, and were out of sight momentarily. Lori was distracted by thoughts of her recent breakup. Her boyfriend wanted to date other people. Why couldn't she accept that? She inhaled a familiar, earthy smell that somehow comforted her. She took a minute to gaze off to her starboard side, where black cormorants were perched on the tree branches near Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. Their wings spread out like little Draculas waiting for nightfall. Off to port was the National Arboretum with its lonely little dock. Normally, the river felt alive with rowing teams charging past. This afternoon, the grounds were deserted. Not even the private school teams were out practicing. Is it a religious holiday? Lori had never been alone on the river, and it made her nervous. She lifted her sunglasses and could make out a dozen or so geese pecking in the grass, getting ready to settle in for the evening. One always had its neck extended, on the lookout for predators, while the others grazed. Her ex used to stand next to her like that at parties. She already missed him and yearned for that sense of belonging. A rich honeysuckle smell wafted across the river and mingled with the gasoline fumes of her 2-stroke engine. All of a sudden, a sharp snap caught her attention, immediately followed by the distinctive puttering of her engine shutting off. A whiff of white smoke blew toward her. Damn, she coughed. Did I hit a log? She glanced up and down the river, secretly hoping for what? That someone would rescue her? She lifted the outboard motor. A large branch protruded from the propeller. Lori then rolled up her sleeve and plunged her hand into the frigid water, grabbed hold of the branch and wiggled it loose. She was so focused on getting the students through practice safely that it never occurred to her what would happen if she herself got stranded. The rowers were nowhere in sight. She swallowed hard to keep down a rising sense of panic. It took 3 tries before the engine would start up again. The boys' 8 was gone, but the girls had stopped their boat near the footbridge just after the river turn. She loved them for that. They would get cold quickly once they quit moving, especially with the wind picking up. As she drew closer, she could hear music coming from the boat. They appeared happy together, oblivious to the anxiety she wore on her face. 9 faces turned toward her as she neared their port oars resting flat on the surface. "Coach!" Sarah shouted. No recognition of the engine difficulty she'd just faced. Adolescent egocentrism was something she had studied in grad school. She often laughed about it with the boys' coach. They were just children, big, strong children. "Megan's hands are bleeding." The tall girl in 5 seat held up her raw, red palms. She was reluctant to do anything that might delay practice. "I have some tape." She opened a large duffel bag, the one that contained the required U.S. rowing safety kit and all the life jackets. She took out a little medical pouch. "Can you catch it?" she said. I can't get any closer. Lori stood up in the launch and bent her knees to position her body for a gentle underhand toss. At the exact moment of the throw, her lower leg pushed against the tiller, which had repositioned itself due to the wind, and she fell over backwards into the bottom of the motorboat. Her prescription sunglasses fell from the top of her head into the water behind her. Coach! All the girls shouted at once. Her motor launch was heading toward the fragile shell with surprising speed. Even with the engine in neutral, it was moving faster than she expected. If she hit them at this rate, her sharp bow would crack their boat in two, and she'd have to rescue 9 girls out of the water. That was not going to happen on her watch. Push me away with your oars. Lori stood up, the seat of her pant wet from stagnant cold water on the bottom of the boat. She grabbed the tiller to correct her steering, but the metal prow of her launch already made contact with the girls' blades. The 8 was getting blown closer to the shoreline, where submerged branches could break the skeg, the small keel that balanced the narrow shell. Or worse, put a hole in their hull. Bow and 3 seat, row! She had no time to pick up her megaphone. Stroke seat, hold water! A gust of wind blew them into the shallows. Starboard oars struck against the mud of the riverbank, and the bow was inches from getting wedged under a fallen tree. Sarah was yelling through her cox box, but Lori couldn't hear a word she said. She needed to grab her megaphone, but it had rolled out of her reach. Or she could back her motorboat away from the 8 and give them room to maneuver. If she didn't act fast, this could be disastrous. Reflexively, she grabbed the edge of the oar closest to her, and with her other hand, she shifted into reverse, then turned the tiller to face the wind. Except that instead of reversing, the motorboat lurched forward. Without her glasses, she had not been able to read the gear shift. Metal on metal clash filled the air. Then a sickening crack as the rigger behind 5 seat pulled off the fiberglass gunnel. Lori's chest heaved with the horror of what she had done. She couldn't see clearly, but her ears understood the damage. She switched hands on the tiller and backed up too quickly. A little cry escaped her mouth. She focused intensely on the girls, a bitter taste in her mouth. Whose brain had been hijacked? She was glad the boys' coach wasn't around to witness that. She reached for her megaphone and guided them to the middle of the river. Megan, the tall girl in seat 5, had pushed Lori away and now was turned around, holding the oar handle of the girl behind her. She was calmly coaching her teammate, slowly showing astonishing maturity. Megan's rapid response held the boat steady in a way that she herself hadn't, an unexpected role reversal. Lori had never administered first aid on the river. She reached for the medical kit, took a deep breath, then motored slowly with great precision toward the rowing shell. Megan helped the injured girl into the motorboat, unscrewed the oarlock, lifted her oar into the motorboat. Her leg was bleeding, hopefully a superficial wound. Sarah's soothing voice blared out from underneath the seat. We got this! The way the girls took care of each other gave her a surge of pride. Challenging situations reveal character, her ex once said, not change character. You never know who will rise to the occasion until you're in a predicament. In the motorboat, Lori quickly treated the girl's scrape. It might need stitches. She felt a tightness in her chest again, as if she had just finished a 2K race. The boys' 8 was undoubtedly heading back to the dock, but with a damaged shell and whitecaps forming on the river, how could she leave the girls? She'd probably have to go to the emergency room. She cursed the boys' coach silently. The girls' extraordinary reactions made her decision clear. Sarah, row steady pressure all the way back. I'll meet you on the dock, she shouted. You can do this. As Lori approached the waterfront park, she could make out a lone figure standing on the dock. The boys' 8 was just landing. She motored carefully into her slot, quickly tied up, and assisted the injured girl out. She rushed to the low dock to help the boys land. The boys' rowing coach had already guided the boats in, asked the bus driver to wait, and now he stood on the dock, looking out for her and the girls. Lori felt so relieved that she choked back tears. At that moment, she knew that they should never have broken up. The end. Thank you.
Wow. Eva,
Did you like
if
the sound effects?
Eva, if you look at the chat room, you will see everybody talking about the tension and the conflict and the heightened stakes. You really nailed a moment on the river. But I'm wondering, because you started the conversation saying about how much we've all been on Zoom, especially as teachers. I also teach, Jona teaches at the college level, but we've also spent a lot of time on Zoom. And I'm wondering, has that changed your writing or your approach to writing? Because you seem like such an exterior person, someone who loves nature. And I'm wondering how that has affected your writing, this sort of forced inwardness we've had this past year.
You know, that's really a great question. I mean, I feel like I had my most prolific year ever, the year that we were home looking at blank screens with little white names on them. I mean, I taught for, 15 months without seeing the students' faces and sometimes without hearing their voices. And I did a little blog post called Hello, Goodbye, because last spring, some of the seniors who were in my Honors English 12 class, I met them for the very first time their last week of high school. And it was like, hi, nice to meet you. Goodbye, have a good life. And it was the same moment. So yeah, it was a very weird year, I'll say that.
Well, I am glad to hear you had a prolific year as a writer, though, and I hope to see and read more of your writing. I really do. And now I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share it with you.
Oh, it was really action-packed, dramatic reading. Thank you, Eva. I'm going to hand it back to Jona now.
Yes, thank you. I love the immediacy of that, and I think it's strange. I mean, these things kind of happen, Caroline. The readers we gather together, they kind of begin to have a sort of theme that goes through. Every reading has sort of its own momentum and its own imagery, and I think tonight we have so many who I was just flipping through my copy that I love to read along, and they're so based in real places here in our area. Or things that happen. Robert was talking about the emergency vehicles. The last story said on the Anacostia, and with Naomi Carlson, the poem that she submitted is set in Union Station, right? So it's sort of these places that are real places around our DMV. So it's so interesting how we get together and these sort of these magical things happen. So it's my pleasure to introduce Naomi Carlson, who has been a total champion of literature and creativity in the DMV area, and specifically with translation as well. I know she's done a lot of translations, and she's part of our Washington Writers Publishing House family with King's Highway, which was published previously. But I would just say she is twice an NEA Literature Translation Grant recipient. She has published 12 titles, 8 translated. Most recently, an Infusion of Violets, which was called New and Noteworthy by the New York Times. Her most recent books include a co-edited anthology, 101 Jewish Poems for the Third Millennium, which was published by Ashland Poetry Press in 2021, just a few months ago, I believe. And please visit nancyneomacarlson.com for more information. So welcome, Nancy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jona. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Julia, for this series. Thank you, audience, for being here. It's a great way to see my friends. I don't get out much still, so I'm happy to see you all. And I'm going to read a few poems. I'm going to read the one in this anthology on page 198, if you're following. And we seem to have a theme of relationships. Robert's couple, will they marry, will they not? And I won't tell you if this was true, but have any of you been doing online dating? Yeah, it's a few nods here. So this one was maybe based on reality, and it is called Union Station. She hunts for his teal shirt, the silver of his hair, only as real as words that shimmer on terminal screens, and waits at the foot of the stairs, spiraling down to a fringe of potted palms. The bar at the Center Cafe, where glasses clink and bubble midair, there sparkle the backdrop for this real-time rendezvous as old trains uncouple and new destinations echo in halls. Bodies push past and no photos to single him out, only his poems. The way the blind rely on a heightened sixth sense to sweep the space ahead. Experience their guide dog, always at their side, until from a swell of faces he emerges, turns to take in the breath of the room, then catches her breath on his neck. Thank you. And this is from an Infusion of Violets, and apparently this is my signature fall poem. Jean Nordhaus, who is the foundation of WWPH, was the president, has supported it. Jean notified me that the Academy of American Poets had taken this poem and put it on the website as one of 6 fall poems, along with Galway Connell and Tracy K. Smith and Nobel laureates, and it was just a shock to me. So I have to read it. It's not a happy experience, and you know how when you walk with the sun and the trees have their leaves falling, and maybe I never knew it, you can catch the leaf and the shadow, and they catch up to one another, and you can see it right there on the asphalt. It was amazing to have witnessed that. And this one is taking you to being hooked up to an IV and getting chemo. Intravenous lines. Nothing better to do than watch each drop of Cytoxin shimmy down a see-through tube to anoint the chosen vein. You could turn to the window's maple, smoldering in autumn sun, to catch the precise nanosecond when leaf detaches from limb. Stare down a likely candidate, curled and tinged with brown. A nudge from the wind might encourage the scene along, but even then, if the angle of light isn't just so, you'd miss the shadow of falling leaf many yards beyond the trunk, hitting asphalt and racing towards its embodied self. When leaf touches ground, does its shadow ascend? In these shortened days of fall, I look for signs of renewal. Look how the sun flares bonfire orange and gold as it clings to the west. Listen. Can you still hear the freight train's burst of horn displacing the air after the last boxcar slinks behind the furthest hill? Do only laws of physics apply? In old movie frames, I see my mother's young face, gardenia pale against dark curls. She is waving, climbing terrace steps to a lake. I reverse the reel at will, my mother backing down the stairs, then floating up again. Thank you. And this is from, I love saying, my new manuscript. The title, I'm still working on that, but it's got a publisher, Seagull Books, who published the last one, is going to publish this one. I'll read a few here, or maybe 2. I have 2 minutes and 17 seconds. We lost my mother this past year, 97 years old, and she did have COVID. That was a little too much for her. And this one is about her. It's called Nocturne. My mother was not afraid of the dark or the abstracts she outlined in black of her last years. Black as the feathers of the raven tasked with finding signs of land, maybe a leaf from an olive tree, but never returned to the ark, distracted by hunger for waterlogged corpses left in the great flood's wake. Hers was the first light I knew, diffused through the swoosh of blood she played by heart. Like the Chopin nocturnes she coaxed from piano keys, even after I'd been released from the holding room she built from her own timbered flesh. Chopin starved and struggled for music's sake, preferring to play piano in the dark. Almost half of his songs of the night were composed in minor keys, and all with broken chords supporting mysterious melodies floating like doves, like his own heart, now preserved in a jar of cognac, buried in a pillar of an old Warsaw church. Mother, my poor mother, were his last words. Mine was the last voice my mother sensed in the shadowy space between breaths. Eyelids no longer fluttering between worlds, mouth too slack to form words from the air. Only the pulse in her neck kept time, obeying the metronome meter implanted in her chest. I like to think that even beyond her heart's last beat, she could still hear my nightingale song, cheering her solitude. I'll read one more. So I have 10 seconds. It's a villanelle, so it's only 19 lines. And we're talking about relationships. So I've had a few of these relationships. I guess I can't turn that off. I'm supposed to obey it, right? And we will say, there. Nope. All right. We'll hear that word. It's Ode for Three Exes. Ex-husbands, like other catastrophes, come in threes. One dead, one fled to New York, and one out of touch. The lost and found keys, the lost and found blues can be sung in any key. Sometimes the one who is left is the one who leaves first, after years holding close the same grudge. Ex-husbands, leavers or left, come in threes. If shoe hits glass or glass hits shoe to seal the chuppah vows, it's always a glass that gets crushed. The lost and found blues can be sung. In any key, Erev Shel Shoshanim will not guarantee eternal evenings of roses and coos of doves. Ex-husbands, like celebrity deaths, come in threes, even marriages outside the fold. Years later, a new wedding band, and with luck, the lost and found blues won't be sung in my key, and no one will add to the wake of decrees, voided ketubas, and deeds covered in dust. The lost and found blues can be sung in a brighter key. Ex-husbands, count them, come in threes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. There's beautiful, wonderfully rendered poems. Thank you so much for sharing those. Really powerful. I look forward to the new manuscript, which I'm very excited that you found a home for. That's such a feat, you know. So congratulations. I'm just gonna ask sort of a bit of. I'm gonna bounce a strange question off you, Nancy, if you don't mind. So, the second poem you read, well, many of your poems have talked about obviously relationships, and also the second one talked about seasons. So, and I know we're getting ready to, you know, fall backwards, and darkness is coming earlier and days are shortening, which many people don't enjoy, but I actually really like. I like it when it gets dark at 5 o'clock, and I like it when the sun doesn't rise until 7:30. But that's just me. So let me throw this out. What are the ways in which do you feel maybe the seasons or the changing of the seasons have moved you through maybe some of the grief in the last, year or two, or maybe in the pandemic? Do you feel that seasons, and maybe specifically fall or winter, have influenced your work or your process?
So I guess pre-pandemic and during pandemic. So in the last 18 months, I just look out my window and it changes seasons, but I'm in here and I'm working. And I teach full-time online, graduate counseling. So the seasons don't really change for me, and that helps my process, because that forced inwardness that we heard about, that has been so conducive to my writing. And in some ways, when the seasons have returned a little bit, they're not quite there, and I'm not still ready to go out there and do it. You asked me to come and read many times, or a few times, and I said, no, it's in person, no. But this Zoom was, oh yes, do that. So it pulls me away from my writing, because I actually go for a few coffees outside and do a little socializing. And yes, I'm getting more experiences, but I have enough to write about. Enough bad things have happened, some good things too. So I think that I'm at my best in the summer. I hate the fall. I really hate the winter. And apparently, I'm reading a book on our Ayurveda. And if you're a Pitta or you're a Vata, that you love June, July, and August, and the rest you could give back to whoever gave it to us.
That's interesting. I'll take the extra fall and winters for you, Nancy. But thank you. Really wonderful, beautiful poems. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll throw it back to Caroline for our next fiction reader.
Yes, thank you, Jona. Thank you, Nancy. I felt your poems really hit my heart with having lost your mom. So hopefully, her memory is a blessing, but your poetry must be a blessing to her too. So thank you. Thank you. And now to a different type of blessing, wonderful writer friend, Garinè Isassi, who wrote, as Jona pointed out, a story that's very rooted in where we are now, both in terms of place and what happens. In lieu of graduation, May 2020. But let me tell you about Garinè first. She's a recovering journalist and the award-winning author of the humorous novel, Start with the Backbeat, about the rock scene in New York City. She lives, totally recommend it. She lives in Maryland with her family, where she works in marketing communications. She's the workshop chair for the Gaithersburg Book Festival, and also is on the Washington Writers Conference Committee, which is coming back this May in person. I am thrilled to share with you my friend, my writing colleague, and a wonderful author, Garinè Isassi.
Thank you. Wow, what a great introduction. Thanks. My story's a little bit long, so I'm only going to read half of it because I know I have a limited time. So I'm just going to get right into it. It's called In Lieu of Graduation, May 2020. First, you named me Heripsime, and now this. Heripsime is the name of a saint and a martyr. Get your feet off the dashboard. Her mom swatted at Ripsy's shins with her one non-driving hand, where her legs bridged between the passenger seat and the glove compartment. She was a victim of sexual harassment and murder. Well, Ripsy, they didn't call it that in ancient Armenia. Ripsy pulled down her feet. She twirled the graduation hat between her index fingers. The tassel caught in the elastic of the face mask that dangled from her wrist like a courtier's handkerchief. Since all high school graduation ceremonies were canceled, Ripsy's mother, Sophie, had a grand idea to dress her up, parade her under the famous street sign named after great-grandfather Levon of the Simonian family. This sign was at the crossroads of Simonian Lane and Love Street. Mom subsequently mortified her by posting it publicly on social media with a variety of cute hashtags. Mom, like all moms, didn't seem to understand that when she tagged Ripsy's Twitter name, Pippi Rips, her schoolmates also saw it, some of whom followed Twitter accounts specifically for ammunition to cause social demotion at Quince Orchard High School. Besides, Ripsy didn't feel like celebrating. COVID lockdown voided all of the fun stuff, too. No prom, no spring track team, no banquets, and left her with nothing but 10-week stream of homework to finish out her high school years. They turned off of Route 15 on to Sabillasville Road, also known to Ripsy and her brothers as Nowhereville Road. It snaked through Catocin Mountain Park, location of the famed presidential retreat, deliberately hidden in this podunk patch of Maryland so as not to be easily found. You couldn't even get cell phone service out here. So, do you think Camp David is over that way? Ripsy waved her hand across her mother's field of vision with her middle finger shooting the bird. Stop, Sophie cried, swatting again. There's probably spy gear around here. Nowhereville Road took them to open farmland on the other side of the park, almost to Pennsylvania, but not quite. It had been over 2 years since they had come out here. Ripsy knew that when her mom was a kid, the family took a yearly photo under the signs. Once Ripsy and her brothers were born, they were dragged out here periodically for additional cheesy family endeavors. The only other time there was a solo photo of Ripsy in this backwater was from her kindergarten graduation. So obviously, her mom would juxtapose the two graduation photo shoots against each other on her social media for heightened cuteness factor of the little girl and the big girl. Hashtag all grown up. Come on, Sophie cajoled, rolling down the window to let the warm air in. It's fun. God knows we could use some fun right now. Ripsy rolled her eyes, which sent her mother into lecture mode. My grandfather escaped a Stalinist work camp as a teenager, your age, immigrated to the U.S. and built his farm up here with his own hands. He and Dad worked hard to build a grocery store chain from nothing. He was so honored when they renamed the street after him. Ripsy joined into her homily, so in unison they said together, it was the first time Pop ever saw his father cry. Ripsy pulled the top part of her graduation robe away from her neck. Geez, this robe is itchy. Her great-grandfather, Levon, began Smart Fruit Grocery as a stand next to his small farm. He priced on a sliding scale for local sharecroppers, wealthy travelers, and the poorest vagabonds. Nobody mentioned that the only reason his produce ended up being labeled organic was because it was, at first, too poor, and then he was too cheap to invest in pesticides and farming chemicals. Ironically, now Smart Fruit catered to the most affluent customers in the trendiest neighborhoods. Each store perpetuated the old world charm with market-researched, homey interiors and Depression-era photos of Levon at his fruit stand everywhere. The tiny country crossroad was not only the site of the first Smart Fruit stand, but also the first meeting of Pop and Nana, Sophie's parents. Nana and her family stopped by to buy cantaloupe on their way to Harrisburg, immediately discovered the Simonians were Armenian too, and the rest is history. They've been together for 73 years, and even now held hands like they were still 12 years old on that fateful day they met. As they turned onto Simonian Road, Sophie gasped and slowed the car. The vines and scrubby shrubs along the side of the road had been cleared. Orange cones and an electrical line took the place of the disappeared greenery. Mom, what the hell? Sweetie, please don't curse, her mother distractedly advised. Within 15 feet of the intersection to Love Street, a parade-style barricade blocked Simonian Lane. Beyond it, the tree line along the right side turned into a chain-link fence. Both Sophie and Ripsy leaned forward in their seats as the car rolled to a halt. What the hell? Sophie said. In mirrored synchronization, they exited the car and walked to the barricade. Ripsy still had the mortarboard in her hand. The unzipped graduation gown billowed out behind her in the light breeze. Where there used to be land behind a gentle line of trees, there was now an active farm behind a metal fence topped with barbed wire. Ripsy followed her mom around the barricade as if in a trance. At least 20 people dotted the field, bent over spring-high corn stalks, apparently weeding the rows, their dark heads bobbing as they pulled unwanted seedlings of clover or dandelion. "This isn't right," Sophie said. "Why wouldn't they use a tractor and a soil cultivator?" As they walked to the crossroad watching the field, Ripsy realized that these workers were not normal farm hands. Many of them had long hair. They were silent and small and narrow-shouldered. They were children. Sophie told Ripsy to stand under the sign as she fiddled with her phone. "Mom, are you kidding? Isn't this beyond weird?" "Don't you see that army truck coming?" Her mother cast her eyes up Love Street, indicating the white Jeep Wrangler with the green stripe along the side, coming at them. She stepped back and ordered Ripsy to smile. There's more, but I'm stopping here.
Wow, Garinè. Yes, everybody must finish this story. I love how it goes from a drive with a mother and daughter that could be anywhere in the country. It happens to be, just a little north of where we all are, and that it has humor in it, and that it has this turn, as we all have turned, a country road or any road and seen something that has taken us aback. And I never asked you this, Garinè, but what inspired this story? Did you turn a road and see something like this? Or did you put it together, from the news reports we hear, on a weekly basis about the status of undocumented people?
Yeah, it was happening I was writing this at the time that I was writing it in May of 2020. Like after I had a high school daughter. I have a daughter who graduated college in May of 2020. And I was just thinking about that at the same time that we were getting all the news stories of what was happening at the border with the separation of the children, and then all of that news was coming out right then, where it's like, where are those kids? Like they were losing kids that were coming, that they had separated from parents. And I was mortified by that. So sort of just like put together some of my own family background and dynamics of my ethnic culture, which is Armenian. I'm Armenian. And I know some of the stories of the Armenian families who are from around here. And it just sort of fell together. It was also one of those stories where I thought the end was going to be different. And when I started writing and the characters sort of did their own thing, it was definitely like that. Like I was like, oh, I want them to go here and do this. And then suddenly there was this farm. And I was like, okay, I don't know where that came from, but I'm going with it. So that's how it happened. And it also was because of COVID and the cause of the lockdown, there was nothing to do. So me and my kids would go out driving, like to nowhere. Like we would drive around and get out and look at a tree, like we would go on little hikes and stuff. And that also played into it. So.
Well, I think the end is masterful. So we all must read it, because she takes us into a place that surprised me, but feels very true to these characters. So thank you, Garinè, for really wonderful reading.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Jona and Caroline, and for this book too. I love reading everybody else's stories as well. And
I'm so glad so many of our writers are here tonight, just not only our readers, but just the wonderful community we built around this, right, Jona? It constantly amazes us.
Absolutely.
So I will now hand it.
And I will say, you know, when we were all in, you know, and still in the ongoing pandemic and lockdown, and I'm still, you know, leery about doing certain things, I felt really lucky that Carolyn and I were working on this anthology when there was, and I think this helped me through many of those months when there was such craziness happening in the world, the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement. I live in DuPont, things were happening, you know, 6 blocks away. And we were able to focus on this creativity and this response and all this beauty that we were getting. And so I thank you all for that and really contributing to this. And it helped me anyway, get through those really very challenging times. And so I thank you all for submitting and giving me hope in life very often. And I will say one of my huge hopes and one of the warmest, most beautiful spirits is Myra Sklarew, and she is here with us this evening. And she was my mentor, my educator during my time as an MFA student at American University. And she is an absolute champion of literature and creativity, again, in the DMV area. She, I think, initiated the MFA at AU. And she was also, it's been published by the Washington Writers Publishing House, and I believe served as president at some point, though we're, I'm not, maybe a year, maybe two, Myra, but let me read Myra's official amazing biography. So Myra Sklarew has written poetry, prose, and nonfiction. Her recent works include A Survivor Named Trauma, Holocaust Memory in Lithuania, which was published by SUNY Press in 2020, a collection of essays on medicine and science, and The Refusal, a novel set in a Greek mountain village, which is in manuscript. And I have just recently been rereading this wonderful book, Over the Rooftops of Time, Jewish Stories, Essays, and Poems by Myra. Myra, we're so privileged, and thank you so much for being here with us this evening. Oh, Myra, make sure you unmute yourself at the bottom there. Hit that magical little microphone. So there you are.
Yeah. And if you can't hear me, let me know. I don't talk loud. First of all, it's such a pleasure to get to know you, some of you who I have not known, through your work. I mean, it's such an honor to hear what you care a great deal about and how you shape and create the work. And what a pleasure to work with Jona Colson and to who's been my teacher as well. And I'd like to thank Jona and Carolyn Bock and Julia Taglieri and Laura Sanchez and the Sandy Spring Museum and all of you. One poem and just a little preface to it. On the subject of global warming and our human origins, I have a poem about stromatolites. Have you ever heard of those? No. When I worked at the artist community Yaddo in the 80s, I discovered one of the 3 sites, the Bahamas, Western Australia, and the Hudson Valley in the world containing fossils of stromatolites, the oldest fossils in the world, 3.5 billion years. The Australian ones, it turns out, are not fossils, but living. They are composed of cyanobacteria, single-celled without a nucleus. Why does this matter? These strange inhabitants are responsible for the Earth's atmosphere changing from one dominated by carbon dioxide to one with 21% molecular oxygen. Without these strange cabbage heads, we would not exist. I'm always amazed by what permits us to be alive in the world and how life began. Ode to Stromatolites. Great cabbage heads, fossil portal to our earliest traces. You bloom in rare fields, docile as mushrooms. You carry secrets displaced from 3 billion years ago. Once when I lived among artists in North Country, I stumbled on your fossil field, and remembered a story I'd been told, the way you funneled oxygen to our earth and set us to breathing. The local gravel company thought it wise to excavate your ancient home and grind up all your secrets in a frugal bed of stone. Let giant semi-trailers and speeding cars crush the story you traveled across eons to tell, embedded in our mitochondria. But in Australia, you line a shallow sea, stubbornly gathering your clan, a strange sight, like some ancient outgrowth, while we cling to our killing ways, eagerly grasping our share of air. Lace butterflies, we're transparent in your field of time. Thank you.
Myra, keep going.
That's all.
Oh. All right, then it gives me a chance to ask you a big
No,
question,
Jona,
Myra.
you have to read
What do I do?
Myra's poem in the collection.
Okay. Oh, Myra, do you have your can you read Coronavirus from the book?
Sure.
Oh,
What page is it on?
This is on page 52. 52.
Thank you.
It's just so of the moment. I mean, it's.
Well, I used to study bacterial viruses when I was a long time ago. And when I heard about the coronavirus, I was intrigued by its shape and by what it could do, and until I realized what it really could do. So coronavirus, single strand of RNA wrapped in your protein coat, a halo of spikes ready to bind to an unsuspecting cell. Some say you're not alive, yet you with your secret partner, SARS-CoV-2, who picks the locks on the protein spikes and then invites you to enter the cell of your choice, all the while turning off its immune system so you may safely enter, head for its nucleus, create infinite copies of yourself, and calmly disrupt the world. It's utterly amazing what viruses can do and what this particular one has done to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Myra, so much. I mean, that last line, and calmly disrupt the world, which is what it's done, right?
It's a little tiny thing.
So how do you, Myra, if I may just ask one follow-up. So because so much of your work fuses those two, disparate in many ways, ideas of biology, of science, and again, with the poetic and the creative. So how do you see those two coming together? Like, what are how can they learn from each other?
I think like all of you, certain things, are part of our experience in our living. And so if you don't shut them away, they just surface. And when I was a child, and I was sick a lot and I didn't go to school very much. And so I could go out in the woods by myself and wander and taste the inside of sassafras bark and find birds and all kinds of things and explore. And I was intrigued by science. But that's not, poetry also does, has a secret language, and it allows something to happen for us to explore that isn't part of bona fide life as we know it. I mean, and we have to let that voice, that inner language, and those feelings somehow find a place. So you just have to be open to everything, to whatever comes to you, and as you all are. And as you are, Jona.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you so much for being here this evening. It's just such a pleasure and such a gift. You're an amazing gift, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back to Caroline. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Myra. Just inspiring just inspiring. Well, I have the great pleasure of introducing our last fiction writer, David Taylor, who is a friend, a fellow writer at the Washington Writers Publishing House. And his story, Guys Like That, will be our last piece. But first, let me tell you about David. His collection, Success Stories, received the WWPH Fiction Prize a few years ago. His fiction has appeared in Gargoyle, Potomac Review, Jabberwock, Washington City Paper, and Rio Grande Review. His nonfiction, which is just as rich as his fiction, includes Cork Wars and Soul of a People. David teaches with the Johns Hopkins Science Writing Program. He lives in DC, and I'm happy to hand over the screen to David Taylor and his story, Guys Like That.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you, Jona, for creating, for fostering so much in this community. Thank you, Julia and Laura, for hosting us tonight. And thank you, Myra, for that great reading. And thank you all for all these readings. Myra, you show just how creativity and beauty just range across so much of experience. And thanks for the reminder to be open to everything. I'll just read parts from my story, Guys Like That. I think you only need to know that it starts from kind of a chance encounter in a hotel a little bit further afield in Las Vegas, but it actually stems from a story I heard in this area. So, Guys Like That. Wesley sat at the bar staring at the thin brown packet propped against a harp tap. Why did that Petaluma return address look familiar? Sure, he'd lived in Petaluma for a few years as a kid, but it wasn't that. It was the 30-something guy in a leather jacket who just handed him the packet in the hotel lobby. Could he have been a childhood friend Wesley didn't recognize? Do I have to sign for it? The bartender asked. He side-eyed the package, then Wesley's brown jacket, and raised his eyebrows. I thought you were off duty. Then the name hit Wes. Randy Powers, the dweeb in 3rd grade. Wes felt a twinge of regret, recalling how he picked on that kid when they were 10. It'd been too easy. No, the guy in the lobby couldn't have been Randy. Anyway, water under the bridge. Wes's memories of his childhood were scattered, plumed like a deck of cards on the floor. Being in the Army, his old man had moved them around everywhere. That was one thing Wes decided early. If and when he had kids, he'd stay put. He tapped the package on the bar and wondered if it was really as important as R. Powers of Petaluma had claimed when he handed it to him, or if the guy was just blowing smoke. Could it possibly be the same Powers? Wes replayed the conversation in the lobby. Though it had happened just minutes before, the lobby scene already felt oddly distorted. This Powers guy in the jacket had stood in front of the UPS kiosk gaping, disbelieving the word closed. How could it be closed for him? Was he such an entitled prick? Wes took another sip, decided he couldn't tell. Maybe the dude was okay. Another Cuba Libre, Chief. Wes tapped the bar. When the bartender returned and placed the glass in front of him, Wes said, "You won't believe this story." Wes knew this bartender loved a good story, and he would tweak bad stories until they were good. Vegas clientele must give him a lot of material. Sometimes when the TV overhead got unbearable, the bartender would walk over to the jukebox and drown out the news with an old show tune. Then he'd roam the bar in a kind of dance, riffing with his customers. "Try me," he said, leaning over the bar toward Wes. Randy Powers considered the Sony convention a small roving city of its own within Vegas, tens of thousands of people needing food, shelter, the works, and Randy had the contract for handling Sony's film editing monster for broadcasters, a car-sized machine that had hit him running all 4 days of the convention. It was a good contract and kept his house-moving business alive during the winter, and in this economy, he wasn't biting any hands. This was his 5th Sony convention. He knew the widths of the dolly to a 16th of an inch, the best moment for pulling the truck into the bay, and how long it took to unload, set up, and break down. By the last day, he was wrung out and jittery. No sleep, no time to eat. That final day blurred with late orders from buyers and local station reps who prowled the booths for 3 days, plus all the chaos of teardown. After all that, back in his room, he had just enough time to mollify his soon-to-be ex-wife, Carol, in a call before a bedtime chat with their daughter. As Carol rattled on, he eyed the package on the bed, the one he thought he'd sent. Carol was deep into the divorce procedure, a household inventory, documentation of his absences, sit down with a lawyer. He dreaded this, but once they started down that road, Randy knew it was crucial to switch gears. He'd seen it many times, guys getting screwed by staying in husband mode long after the tide had turned. He never thought it would happen with them. After talking with the lawyer, he now had to get a signed form and a check out for next day delivery to avoid Carol getting grounds for slapping him with non-support. Everything dotted to the I's. Randy's worst episode as a father came when Kira ran home crying that she'd been bullied by 2 kids at school. He'd gone mute with rage and done nothing. Days later, he caught himself driving past the bullies' homes at night like a stalker, yet he couldn't manage to talk about it with anyone. Damn. Now in the hotel, he slapped the slick brown packet against his leg and looked around. While he stood there, a guy about his age walked up and said, "Is there a problem?" He was sturdy, a little taller than Randy. He wore a coffee brown jacket, open, and brown pants. Randy had noticed this guy come out of the hotel bar. He might have weaved a step even. The guy's posture stirred some kind of suspicion in the pre-thinking reptile portion of Randy's brain. Randy took a breath, then explained the package, the deadline, his closed UPS kiosk. In his worry, it all tumbled out. The guy started to laugh. Fantastic, Randy thought. It's near midnight. I'm wasting my time telling this idiot my problems. And he mocks me. The geyser of rage welled up from his feet. "You think that's funny?" he said. The man straightened up and tugged at his jacket, actually pointed at his heart. This nut job was crazy or drunk. He seemed to be itching for a fight. He might get it. The guy was pointing at a golden brown shield on his jacket. "I work for UPS," he said. "Problem solved." As he spoke, he was swaying a little. It really needs to get there tomorrow," Randy said slowly. "Seriously, there's a kid's future hanging on this." The bartender laughed. This one had some possibilities. "For example," he said, "who's the package addressed to?" "He told me who it was, his lawyer," I said. This bartender sometimes didn't listen. They both looked at the address again. "So," the bartender said, "he said it was about his kid's custody. But do we know that?" He drummed his thumbs on the bar like a soundtrack for an emerging idea. "I don't know, man," laughed Wes. "I just know that if this was the guy, as a kid, he had to stick up his ass. Even as a kid." He shook his head. "I had no idea." "I'll wager he's suing to take some kid away from their mother. Guys like that don't change, man," the bartender said, shaking his head. "Not really." There were only 2 other people in the bar, huddled together at the other end. The bartender did a little jig over the jukebox and danced on its side while he searched for the right song. "That's bullshit," Wes said. "I mean, I've changed a lot." "You're not that guy," said the bartender, still poring over the song titles. Dumping his problems on some stranger. "For all you know," he stopped, struck by one of the choices. Wes glanced at the packet again, inspected the handwriting. He dated a girl once who was into handwriting analysis. Weren't those long diagonals condescending? "It's probably an eviction notice," the bartender offered. "He's probably evicting some old lady who's fighting for custody of her granddaughter. Like that case in Florida?" His finger stopped halfway down the glass. "I don't know, but guys like that don't change. Trust me. They look all benign when they're helpless in a hotel lobby. It comes out, though." Wes took a sip, savored the tang of Coke against rum, and considered this. Certainly possible. But screwing over Powers now ran against his sense of who he'd become. Sinatra oozed into wee small hours. Thank you.
David, thank you. I mean, this reads like, a movie, I have to say. I'm wondering, since you are a very, from your credits, a very prolific writer, that question that I asked earlier. Has the pandemic, has this moment we're in changed how you write? Because I'm trying to figure out myself if it's changed my writing or not. Has it changed your writing?
That's a really good question. And I was thinking about when you asked it earlier. For a while, it just kind of stalled my writing in one sense, and that what the way I had been writing up to then just didn't work for a while. I couldn't get there. So I went back, and I went back to writing more in a journal in the morning, and to finding different ways in. I actually would do projective scribbles and doing so many drawing things and try different prompts that way. So I think it did kind of stir different ways of getting back into a rhythm that I'm still finding. But yeah, it did. It has changed, and I'll be interested in how others have found it too.
Well, thank you for this. This story is worth reading in its entirety to find out if you like either of those guys. And now I'm going to hand it back to Jona for our last reader. I can't believe the night has gone so fast, right, Jona?
It has gone quickly when you have this much talent. Like, the time flies. So the last reader is the amazing writer and Laura Shovan. Laura, am I saying your last name correctly? I say Shovan. Is that right?
It's Shavan, but it's close enough.
All right. Well, Laura Shovan, and actually this is one of those gifts. Again, Myra Sklarew and Laura Shovan share space in our anthology, which is so, this happened last night at a reading. You know, it's these magical things happen. And Laura has 2 poems in this, and I was lucky enough on a strange twist of fate to meet Laura years ago at a Gettysburg workshop. It just, strange things happen. So Laura, thank you so much for being here. So Laura Shovan is a children's author, educator, and Pushcart Prize nominated poet whose chapbook Mountain Log, Salt and Stone won the inaugural Harris Poetry Prize. She has written several award-winning middle grade novels, including The Last Fifth Grade of Emerson Elementary, Takedown, and Sydney Taylor notable A Place at the Table, which was co-written by Sadia Faruqi. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So Laura, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you, Jona. I know we've known each other for many, many years at this point, and totally an honor to be in the book next to Myra, whose work I admire so much, and to see friends tonight like Nancy, who's a dear friend. And just thank you to you and to Caroline for creating the space of this book for us all to be with friends and to discover new friends. And I also, of course, want to thank our hosts at the museum.